This video will walk you through how to delete and insert in the beginning of an array. So the assumption that we have here is that we have an array of size 4. So we have basically created an array with 4 elements, so its size is 4, and we have assigned values to 3 of its elements, so we can say that there's 3 elements. The fourth element is empty, so I'm just putting a 0 to indicate that it's empty. And I'm going to write a show function, which is going to depend on what is the number of elements to show me this array. So for this array of 4 things, the show will show this. So that's the arrangement that I have for the show function. And now let's examine what it is that I need to do in order to delete from this array. So I have an array with 4, 3, 5, and what I want to do is I want to delete the 4, which is index 0. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 3 over on the place where the 4 is, and I'm going to move the 5 over where the 3 is, and then I'm going to move the curly brackets 1 over. So it will basically look like, initially I'm going to move the 3 over here, will be 3, 3, 5, then I'm going to move the 5 over, will be 3, 5, 5, and then I'm just going to move the curly brackets. So these different steps, if I want to write them out one by one, I say A0, right? A0 is this index, is this element, is equal to A1, which is this. So I'm telling it 3 moves here. Then I say A1 is equal to A2, which means this equals this. So then I move the 5 over. And at that point, I need to think, how am I going to do this for a larger number of numbers? Because I don't know if it's going to be 3 numbers or 300. So that means that this part here needs to be written in a loop that is going to happen as many times as we need to, depending on how many numbers we have. So we need to think of what happens to these values here. So if I name this value I, so this index here is I, then I can see that it changes from 0 to 1, right? So if I am to think about this in terms of any size array, well, any array will start at 0, and how far do we need to go depends on the size of the array. So how does this number here change in terms of how many things we have in the array, which is the number of the elements? Well, this 1 is actually number of elements minus 2, right? The number of elements is 3, so 3 minus 2 is 1. So we need to change the value of I from 0 to number of elements minus 2. So if I was to write a loop to change my I, then I would write it this way. I would say for I equals 0, and then I is less than elements minus 1, I plus plus, and then where I had A0 and A1, I would just have AI and AI plus 1, right? So wherever I have a 0, that's an I, and wherever I have a 1, that's an I plus 1. And then that loop here will do the shifting for me as necessary for any number of elements. I don't have to manually write it. The next step for me to do is just to tell the program that I have changed the number of elements so that it redraws the curly brackets before it shows the 5. So if I really wanted to, there's the code for it. This is the shift left code, and this is making the left equal to the right. This is decreasing the number of elements. And then if I run the code, you will see that it will show you 3, 5, which is what happens after I delete the 4. Now let's see what we need to do in order to insert. Well, in order to insert, what I need to do is I need to shift elements to the right. So I need to shift all my elements to the right. So if I'm going to be deleting, if I would like to insert at index 0, then I need to move all these numbers to the right in order to do that. And how do I do that? Well, again, in order for me, before I can write out the loop, it helps me to write out the different steps like you see here. And by doing that, I can figure out what are the starting and stopping points of my loop. So let's say initially I need to move the 5 over. That means that I'm saying that A3 is equal to A2. Then I'm going to need to move the 3 over. That means that I'm saying A2 is equal to A1. Then I need to move the 4 over. That means that I'm saying A1 is equal to A0. And those are all the shifts that I need to do. Now let's look at how do I want to label these? Well, let's say this value here is 2, this is 3, so I would label this my I and this my I plus 1. What happens to my I? Well, again, I can see it goes to 0. The 0 part is easy, right? We know that for any list it will have to go to 0, but where does it start? It starts at number of elements minus 1, right? So if we have 3 elements and this is a 2, then this is number of elements minus 1. We could see that with our own eyes. So if I was to write a loop that's going to change my value of I make it so that I starts at number of elements minus 1, and I make it so that it goes on while I is greater than 0, or it stops when it becomes equal to 0, and then it goes backwards, I minus minus, because the value of I decreases by 1 every time. And instead of A3 and A2, I just write AI plus 1 equals AI. And this is the loop that will do all my shifting to the right. And then the next step is, in order for me to insert the value, I'd have to say, okay, well, the first element, which is where I wanted to insert, is equal to some new value, let's say 10. So then we need to resize the number of elements plus plus, so that we can show the curly brackets to the right of this value 5 that we have. And if let's see how that works. So this is my insert first loop, right, that I just showed you, and my shifting where my right equals left. This is my shifting all my values to the right. And then here I'm inserting a value of 100 to this previous array that I have. So now that 100 is going to go at the beginning, and when I do the number of elements plus plus and I show you the array, then you can see it as you can see it. So that is the idea behind this picture, and the big picture is to illustrate to you that there's a lot of shifting that needs to be done when you're inserting or you are deleting when you're deleting from an array. You need to shift everything to the left, and when you're inserting in an array, you may have to shift everything to the right, which is one disadvantage with arrays that we'll be able to resolve later on when we get to linked lists.